Now we'll move on to the second of the Platonic solids, the octahedron. Again, having worked through the imagination with the students to consider themselves as a central point, this time surrounded by 6 equidistant points. These points will create the vertices of the octahedron. With careful and precise imagination, they've been able to see that each of these faces is once more an equilateral triangle, only this time, instead of 3 triangles coming together at each vertex, 4 triangles will meet at each of the vertices. In order to create the octahedron net, the unfolded 2-dimensional shape made by taking apart that 3-dimensional form, we'll use the 6-part division of the circle that was introduced in 6th grade and covered in a previous video. We'll start with a center circle. Working the way around the perimeter, again, dividing that circle into 6 equal parts. You can see there's a little bit of overlap in a few of these places. That's due to both the thickness of the lead on my compass and also perhaps a little bit of lack of precision, but it will still be okay. Now, perhaps you can see, as we know that we would need 4 equilateral triangles to meet together at the top of the octahedron and 4 to meet at the bottom, and then those 2 would have a square base. Those square bases put together would create the octahedron itself. So those 8 triangles are actually already in this 6-part division. This is an incredible opportunity for the students to begin to look to see, can they find where those 8 triangles are and how they are connected. But of course, for sake of the demonstration, I'll give them to you. The center line of the form runs here. This is the place where all of those triangles will come together. I'll go ahead and continue by finding these lines. This line will create the beginning of this triangle. And it's important with these constructions, you can see this one is just slightly off. I didn't connect to that point. I'll go ahead and try and get a little bit more careful. This triangle will be next to this triangle. I'll also connect it to this triangle. So what I've done so far is to connect the outer points to create the 6-part division, and now I'm looking at these points that would connect the cross points. That'll create this triangle, this triangle, this triangle, and now I'll also use it to create this one. You can see again, I can see that I've gotten off and that it doesn't connect. So I'll try that again for a little more precision. That's a great chance for the students to see that you also will make the same mistakes that they will. Even though this won't be a part of the form, it's nice to have it carefully drawn. Now this, I'm using the intersection of this line and this crossing between 2 circles and a line. And I'll do the same thing here. So now, from my original circle, I've made it into a 6-part division. I've found these additional lines connecting these points. Then I added these connecting the outer parts using the center line that I drew as an intersection, and I'll do the same over here. Using this intersection to this point where my center line of my octahedron net connects. And the same thing here. And there it is, the net for the octahedron. You can see this is 8 equilateral triangles. These 4, the points will come together to join at a vertex. And these 4, the points will come together to join at a vertex. This vertex will join these 4 faces, this one for these 4, and this one for these 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This point and this point will come together to join these 4 faces for the 6th vertex. Now, of course, it is important to remember again to leave some space for the flaps for gluing. And so I'll go through and just mark those out for myself so that I don't forget. This one I'll freehand in. And then, just as with any of the other forms, this is a good time to spend some time and really bring beauty into the form. Consider ways to really balance it with color, to bring that extra care, and to spend that time to think about how can we balance our thinking with our feeling. There we have the 8 faces of the octahedron. Now we'll score and then we'll cut. So I'll score along all of the straight lines, and it was important as I was shading, I did want to keep track of where these center lines were for future reference for this scoring, but at the same time, because I extended all of my lines beyond what I needed, I can use that as the guide, and even if I couldn't see the center of the face, the place where the 2 faces met at an edge, I'd still be able to find them by using the guidelines and the rest of the construction. This line will eventually become a cut, but for now I'm just scoring everything. You do want to be careful where you're scoring along these lines, that we're not scoring too deeply at the vertices. We don't want to cut through by scoring several times and wind up having a hole in our finished octahedron. Now that everything's been scored, I can go ahead and cut. I'll start by cutting out all of the curved flaps. These don't, again, have to be curves. I'll just use the construction line that was there. Care in those points really makes a difference. Then I'll go back over the straight lines that I had already scored to make sure that I'm cut all the way through. The scoring will help to make these cuts straight, but on a larger piece, you may want to use a straight edge as well. That avoids the knife cutting off line and making a cut that you'll regret later. Hopefully, and then remove our net. You'll see I did wind up with two pieces. I was a little more careful. I think I could have gotten that to stay connected. But even with it in multiple pieces, I'll be able to fit those back together because I've created the flaps and I know where those pieces need to join. Now, there are other arrangements to these nets, so perhaps you'll be able to find one that allows you to have a little more success in keeping your pieces together, a little less risk of them falling apart. But as it is, although I did not keep it in one piece, I do, once I fold up all of my scored edges, can see that that will be 4 of the faces joined together. I'll join the other 4 as well. I'll add a little glue to that now. Because they're in 2 pieces, I shouldn't have any trouble joining them together. I like using a liquid gel medium and a brush, but any kind of glue will work. I do avoid hot glue guns or tape. They tend to make things not fit together quite as well. And it does take a little bit of patience. There's often a bit of positioning the faces and then holding them while they dry, which is a nice opportunity in class for the students to spend some time talking and holding things carefully. But it's never a bad opportunity to learn a little patience. Once that has started to dry, I can set it aside to finish, go on to the other one. If this were all in one piece, I'd be able to do it kind of wrapping it around rather than in two sections, which I actually find really satisfying, but this is also just fine. I am finding that I missed scoring just a couple of places. Now, the vertex where it was held together, that small point that I could have cut through if I wasn't careful, is really a structural weakness only while it's in the net. Once these faces are glued together with the flaps, they're held together by their edges, and so even if the vertices came loose or came apart, the solid would still stay intact. Sometimes they need just a little more glue and probably a little more patience. Because I set that aside to dry, you can see that this has gotten just a little bit twisted as I was gluing it. So before I put them together, I will take a little bit of time and just try and give it a little bit more regular shape, bringing that a little bit closer. You can see that my measurement or my cutting was just a little off. It looks like this side is just slightly off. That's okay. Done in larger scale, you'll find that it's much easier to prepare this in a way that is a little more accurate. But even if it's just a little bit off, they're still getting the experience. It's really not about that finished product. Although the finished product is a beautiful thing and something to be proud of, it's really that process of working from their imagination, using those geometric tools that they've used for creation in the past, and kind of coming up with that analytic process of how can I create this two-dimensional net that forms into this three-dimensional shape. That's really it's the process that's the most important part. All right, and then to fit them together, now with two pieces it can be a little tricky. It does help to kind of position the flaps slightly outward, to use a little bit of extra glue. So building up just a bead of glue. Helps not to put too much or you wind up with glue smearing out all of the edges and tends to get everywhere. This is again where I like to use a brush. And then making sure that the tabs on one side go into the blank spaces on the other. We can fit the two halves together. Apply a little light pressure. I like to turn it to check those vertices and then have patience. There we have it, the octahedron. 8 equilateral triangles. Each vertice is a place where 4 faces meet, and it has a total of 6 vertices. I'll just give it a little more time for it to dry, and it'll be finished.